Hello, let's get started. Welcome. This is Beth Linden from AWS Educate. Thank you for joining the Educator Mobilization webinar series. Educators all over the world are rapidly transitioning to remote learning, and some are doing this for the first time. So we wanted to do something to help ease the transition. This webinar series was created for educators by educators who have expertise in remote learning and can share their insight with you. The series runs through May 1, so check back on the website each Monday to view new webinar topics. You will be muted during the webinar. However, you can put your questions into chat at any time, and we've set aside time at the end to answer those questions. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Doug Bergman, who is an educator and the Computer Science Department Chair for PorterGaud School in Charleston, South Carolina. He's here to discuss project-based interactive learning in virtual education. And with that, I hand it off to you, Doug.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, Beth and I had actually worked together last year on a project with my students and her team with the Amazon Deep Lens AI camera, and that was a really good time. Ended up presenting with her team at ISTE in Philadelphia last year, and so when they reached out and wanted to partner on this project as well, I jumped all over that one. So project-based learning, interactive learning online, that's vital. Right. And so what's great about this topic is it's going to translate beautiful into face-to-face as well, not just online. So if you haven't ever done it or were interested in doing it, you're going to learn a lot today. So we'll talk about three major topics today. How do you define projects and set projects up such that it'll work in this environment? And then how does student choice play a part in that, which is vital to this? Once you have the project itself, what actually is incorporated into the project itself? What's the content and what are the various components of it, as well as how are you going to deliver this? How is it going to be administered from the teacher's perspective and the student perspective? And then, as always, how do we evaluate? How do we give feedback? How do we grade, not only in online, but in projects as a whole, especially when they have a lot of individual choice in them? And so these are elements we'll talk about today. So hello, I'm Doug Bergman, and been in computer science, project-based learning as long as I can remember. I think my first year in school, I walked into a computer science classroom, had no idea how to do it, but I knew computer science. I had some cool kids who wanted to do some things, so we started just working on projects, and whatever languages made sense and technologies made sense at the time, and it worked. And they didn't need to be led by a textbook, and they didn't need me holding their hand. They just learned because we picked cool projects. So I started to pick up on that, and over the course of years, I got better at identifying what kind of projects worked, what kind of technologies worked well in this environment, and how to design projects, how to evaluate projects, all the things that go along with the actual school element of project-based learning to make it work logistically. I started to get pretty good at that, and I feel like now I understand that pretty well, and I'm a wholehearted believer that this is vital to education in any area. And I have been so excited and honored to have presented at conferences. I've led workshops, I've led webinars. I wrote a book a couple years ago. You can see that right there, just about engaging interactive project-based learning, especially with computer science, obviously for that topic. But I just believe it and think that there's value in discussing this. So I'm excited to contribute to the conversation. So if you want to reach out to me, please do. Otherwise, sit back and enjoy. So let's talk about this. So projects and choice. All right. So number one thing I'll say, you got to have student buy-in. It doesn't work without that. Right? It doesn't work well without that. And I'll explain how to do that and what that actually means in a little bit. But it starts with relevance to self, relevance to the world around them. All right. And we'll talk more about how to develop that, how to identify that. All right. And then just having project depth. You need a project to have enough meat on its bones for them to bite into. All right. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So let's dive into some of the details here. So we talked about student buy-in. What does that mean? All right. Well, what I mean is I want students to be engaged and motivated and excited and passionate about the topic that they've chosen for their project. Okay. Now, depending on who you are and what discipline you're in, you may be in chapter 3 or in this unit or that unit, whatever the umbrella topic is that the projects fall under. That's fine. Okay. You can have subcategories of any topic, but ultimately you're going to ask the students, okay, here's the umbrella topic we're studying. Okay, I want you to go into the world and research and figure out something related to this topic that is something that's important for you. Is there something happening in politics right now, in science right now, in the world right now? Is there something, a problem? Is there an issue? Is there something that people aren't aware of? Would you like to bring attention to something? Is there some misinformation about there? Is there some lack of information? So can you have an impact on something socially and bring something to the surface maybe that conversations aren't happening about that you think there should be conversations happening about? This is your chance to express something. Okay, one of my colleagues calls them passion projects. Okay, and if you can get them hooked like that, and they really start to, this is what I believe, this is what I think. Trust me, at that point, you need to just get out of the way because they will surpass any expectations that we set for them. And so it starts with helping them identify what that is. All right, so I think it's important to distinguish the why and the what. And so when they propose something for me, I ask for both, but I really focus on the why. In fact, I tell them I'm going to probably reject 25% of your proposal applications because I don't believe that you really want to do this project, or I don't think you researched it enough. You don't really know enough about it because I want you to prove to me why I should let you do this project. Okay, and I want to see that. I want to see evidence. I want them to have researched enough to know enough about that topic, and have some examples, have some statistics, have some images, have some information about it, have some interesting facts about it. All right, and they may have a very personal connection with something. One of the projects we do is we have the students. We're doing app development, and we ask them to think of someone who has a mental, physical, learning, emotional, behavioral, mental, some kind of disability or disorder or medical condition. We ask them to make an app that takes advantage of the components of a mobile phone that helps maybe make that person's life a little bit better, or maybe helps it make a lot better. Okay, and so what a great topic, and everyone has a connection in there somehow, somewhere. All right, maybe they have an uncle or an aunt, maybe their parents are a doctor or a lawyer, maybe they have a best friend. All right, who knows what they have, but most people have a connection with that. And so that's the kind of project we're talking about. Okay, so once you sort of have the kids sort of honed in on the why, then you start saying, okay, what's the what? So now you just need good, solid, complex, long, meaty project they can bite into. A lot of components. We'll have to have a whole section. We'll talk in a few minutes about content, right? But give them time to get involved with the project, to make a connection with the project, to get deeper into it. Because the deeper they get, the better they're going to do. The more time they're going to spend on it. The more skills they're going to learn, because they get these ideas in their mind and they want them to come out in their project, and they'll learn whatever they got to learn to make that happen, right? And so that's important. We'll talk a little bit about that later. So supporting assignments, this is a strangely very important element. So what I'm talking about here is your minor assignments, your side projects, your out-of-class assignments, things that allow them to look at the topic or the technology or the project or the skills that they're doing in their main project, to look at that from different perspectives. So what do I mean by that? Are there some ethical issues related to the project they're doing? Are there some moral issues? Are there some religious issues? Are there some current events they're talking about? Is there a discussion that the class could have? Could that student lead that discussion online? Is there a book we should read? Is there an article we should read? Was there a newscast clip last night in the news about it? Was there an article in the paper about it? Was there a magazine interview that we should read? Should we actually get a speaker in? Should that person go interview some? So there's lots of things you can do to get excited about it. And they come from all these different angles, and it just builds connection with topic. And when you do that, they buy into the project. And if they buy into the project, like I said, just get out of the way. Right, they're going to do awesome. All right, and this is, I don't care what age group we're talking about here. This is true for everybody. When people are excited about their own learning, great things are going to happen, right? So let's talk about that. Okay, so what is the content of the project itself, and how is this delivered and administered in your class? What's the pedagogy through which it happens? Well, a couple things to think about. So you're going from face-to-face to online teaching right now, right? So you've got to figure out what was it you did in the face-to-face that translates really well into online, and that you think is vital to this class succeeding in the way you want it to succeed. You got to identify what that is. All right, this is active learning. Okay, this is active learning where the students will get out of this what they put into it, right? So make sure your class is that every day. Students are doing something every minute they are with you. They are doing something every minute they are not with you, right? Well, maybe not every minute, but a lot of minutes, right? And not because they have to, but because they want to, right? And not for your reasons, for their reasons. And if they buy into it, they will. Right. One of the things that is important is that peer-to-peer piece, which is definitely lacking when you're online. It's not lacking in person, but it's lacking online. We'll talk about strategies on that one. And we'll talk about the actual physical informational component, what is actually in the project, and then some other things that should be in the project as well. All right. And then think about, okay, what do I do when I've got them in front of me? And what do I have them do when they're not in front of me? So those are things to consider. All right, so let's dive again. So when they're in front of you, I would say it should be live. Don't have too much recorded information in your class. Live is where the good stuff happens. Live is where the human side of technology happens. Your cheesy jokes, their little stupid sayings, the things that happen in class all day long every day, the banter back and forth, that interaction is vital online. Let it happen. Let it even get silly at times, but let it happen because that's what they're not getting online that they're getting in the classroom and in the hallways at school. They're not getting that. So I think it's important to have that live element. Because don't forget, they're going to have 2 or 3 or 4 live elements of classes, in a day. And so if you were to give them maybe a 30-minute video to watch that night as well, like in preparation for tomorrow, well, you probably aren't going to get a full amount. If you gave a 30-minute video, you're not going to get 30 minutes of value out of that, right? They've already seen 3 hours of like interactive live lecture, which was fine, but it's still online. All right. And so it's just important to think about that. But if you do need to do some recording, there's certainly some places where it does make sense. Please follow best practice where, short and sweet chunks, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes in length at most, and have some kind of interactions after each one so they're doing something with what they've just seen. Because otherwise it's a long, boring experience. And what if 3 other teachers do the same thing? So you have to think about that. You want your class to be different than those, all right? So for me, I think about what's important in my in-person class that I want to bring online. Well, my in-person class, the way it works right now, at least on some days, is they come in and they're working on their projects. Okay, they may have a question. I will go over there and help that student with the question, and the other students in the class would hear the question. That student would, I'm computer science. That student would show me their project on whatever technology we're using. I would look at that. I would talk aloud. I would ask them some questions. They would answer. All the students are hearing this. They're eavesdropping. They're leaning over. There's a couple of kids who have the exact same question who came and they're standing right behind me. John and Susie just did this. I've already got them involved in the conversation. And I'm telling Susie right now, hey, Susie, listen, once we get this working, you have to pay it forward because those guys over there are going to need your help. And right, I'm doing that every day in class, right? And I want that to be part of what's online. And it happens. That's what I'm doing right now with my classes. One of my students the other day even said, Mr. Bergman, this is just like being in regular class. I was like, thank you. That's something I work hard for, and I'm glad you noticed that one. Because one of the things you don't get online that you do get in person is the feel for the class. How are we doing with this project? How's the pace of it? Where are people responding? Where are they not responding? Where are they getting stuck? Where are they not getting stuck? Where's the class as a whole with this? What's the atmosphere of the class? You don't get that online, right? Because you're not perceiving the class in that way because it's not one class. It's a bunch of individual kids who just happen to be in the same screen together, right? So it's important that you decide those elements. For me, that's important to bring into the class. You need to decide what's important for you that happens in face-to-face that you want to try to bring into online. It may not translate directly, but I think the attempt is worth it, right? So, because don't forget, no matter what you're in, Chime, Zoom, Google Meet, whatever software you're in, it looks like the kids are lined up together like Brady Bunch, right? But they're not, right? They're in their bedroom or in the living room or at their desk by themselves, right? And class after class, day after day, that's a lonely feeling, right? And so the connection between their peers is vital. The connection between you is vital, but especially between the peers is vital. And one of the ways you do that is you have a lot of feedback that they're not getting online that they usually get. All right, they're usually getting people to give them some advice, give them some suggestions. They have their friend try it out. They've answered something. They bounce some ideas back and forth. They just overhear conversations. So that part's not happening. So you have to do that. So both at the beginning and in the middle and the end, you need to make sure feedback's happening. We've talked before about when they do their proposals, have the students definitely watch each other's proposals, right? Put them online and give feedback to that, right? Because they're not getting that regularly. That's a great way to help build community on there. Right? I said before, this is active learning. All right, this is do it. This is you will get out of this what you put into it. And there's two elements to this. What are they doing with you? What are they doing without you? We'll talk specifically about that online. But I'll challenge you here. When you're accepting projects, it's okay to accept a project where the student doesn't know how to do exactly what they proposed skill-wise. In fact, I'll argue some people do project-based learning where they learn a skill set, and then they stop learning, and we do now a project that demonstrates that skill set. And that's one way of doing projects. And there's another way that I think is at least equally as valuable, in my case more. It's okay that the students don't know how to do it. In fact, they're going to learn how to do it through the project itself. Now, yes, we can help them, and there's going to be resources and that kind of stuff. And so they're not going to have to just be on their own lonesome, although some will probably figure it out. But it's okay that they learn it as they're doing it. In fact, just-in-time learning says that's the best way to do it. When better to learn a skill than right now, because that's what the skill I need. That's when it's going to make the most sense, okay? And most likely 8 other kids need that same skills. They're going to chime, right? So you have to think about that. And so that's what active learning means online, right? So the content of the project, the information that you want them to have, and there is information, and some of it could even be rote stuff. You use whatever tools you have to sort of get that part in there, and that's going to be part of the project, no problem. But in addition to that, in addition to the information, in addition to the nouns that are related to your topic area, what skills do they need to interact with that content? What concepts at that higher level do they need to interact with that content? Okay, what business skills do they need? In your field, in your industry, what skills do people who are in that world need to be able to interact with the content and each other that you think you should bring into your project? What soft skills? What we call them 21st century skills? What skills of those types do you think are valuable to have in your project? Put it in there. All right, that's a big project, right? And you'll see how that works. And then there's a way to add choice in there. When we do rubrics later on, I'll talk about that. You can do all that kind of stuff and still give the students choice even on those elements. And so, all right, so there's how to do in the class. Out of class, all right, so there's lots of things to think about here. Extra help, maybe, hey, on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3:30 to 5, I have office hours. That's great as long as the kid has a question at those times. But when you're doing project-based learning and they're doing something on Monday night, they have a question Monday night or Tuesday morning or Wednesday late morning or whatever. And so what I've found is those office hours don't work as well, because especially if 10 kids log in at that time, now you've got 10 kids who probably all have different questions. And in project-based learning, they probably do. So that's going to not be as effective as it could be. And so what I've done is I've just allowed the students to, hey, listen, Mr. Bergman, I have a question. Can you help me with such and such? Can we meet online or something like that? And if that's the best answer, then I say, sure, we can meet online. We'll spend 5 or 10 minutes online and we solve that. I spend maybe 30 minutes a day doing this. And I have as many students as all of you have. And so it really hasn't really impacted my life. And it actually allows me to be a better teacher. But the reason why that works and why you need to be careful about this one is because I have excellent resources and screen recorded help. Those two elements right there make my office hours not be that much. All right. So resources, what I mean by that is this is vital. Okay. You've got to have a variety of resources that are well vetted and easily accessible for your kids so that when they have questions, big questions or small questions, ideas or skills, okay, content or concepts, right? But they have a place to go that they can trust that you have put together for them. Okay, links that matter, links that are easily understandable, what information they can get if they follow that link, documents, videos, YouTube, TED Talks, whatever information they need that's maybe content related should go in there. For skill and concepts, I recommend highly, you're going to know what questions they're going to have, especially if you've done this a couple of times. But even early on, you can figure, they're probably going to you're going to be able to list them. Go ahead and pre-make those answers. make a little 30-second, 1-minute video of you addressing that exact question using whatever example you would normally use in class, and go ahead and pre-answer that and let them see that, and they're going to, oh, that's exactly the question I had. Oh, cool, I've got it right here. And there's my teacher with her silly jokes, right? And so you can do that, and those jokes can be fun, right? They don't need to be professional level, right? This is something, the human part of you can come out here. And so that's important, but it's important that you have long videos and short videos and screenshots and sample projects and sample code for me in the computer science world, but examples of things. Sometimes they need explanations. Sometimes they already understand the explanation. They just need an example of how to specifically do that. All right. And so you have to think about, you need audio, you need video, you need text, you need images, you need all these multimedia styles of resources. And you don't need 200, right? You need 10, you need 15, something that's easily accessible, that doesn't take 20 minutes to decipher. If you'll do that, and something that I stumbled on and I love it now because I've figured a tool that allows my students to ask better questions. And so what I do is, especially when screen recording got to a point where a lot of people are doing it, I started using it more and more and more in my classes. And then some of my students started sending me videos at night. Hey, Mr. Bergman, I'm working on my project and I've got this issue going on. You can see it running in the da-da-da. And I'm actually, wow, this is awesome because I can see their project. I can see it running. I can see it doing what it wasn't supposed to be doing or whatever, the error message or it's broken or whatever happens in computer science all the time. But I was able to see that. I was able to hear their question. I could see where they were stumbling for words. I could hear them, hear where they were frustration. I could hear that. And so it probably allowed me to just answer that question right there on the spot with email. Hey, here's, hey, you need a semicolon. Right? Or it could be more like, hey, this is a bigger issue. Here's a resource. Here's some ideas you might check into. And so that was one thing that was helpful. But let's say that I wasn't able to sort of give them something where they still had a question. Well, they've already asked a question. So now if we meet in extra help, we jump into it immediately. Right? We can do a share screen and we can jump in immediately and do that. So that's also helpful as well. Okay. However, if you have really large groups, it may be an additional resource that you can have. It's called a Slack is a product that works business and industry. It's all over the place. It's basically like a mass classroom-based group chat, only it's really easy to manage. You can post questions. People can go back and research previously asked questions and see the conversations, the responses. It's very searchable. There's a bunch of different channels you can have in there, and it's set up exactly for those kind of discussions, and some people take advantage of those, and that's a good option. So let's look, and I want to finish up with my pedagogical thought here. So long, open-ended, big, meaty, juicy projects, right? This good stuff for them to get involved with. And the reason why I believe in that is because they offer time to explore without pressure, right? You have time to let things develop, to explore this, to let that understanding sink in a little bit and push it a little bit the next day, to make mistakes, to even have huge failures. Imagine letting a kid be able to go down this road that he or she is going down, and knowing it's probably not the best avenue, but you're like, you know what, I'm going to let them go down there because I know there's some good stuff along that path. And they get down there and it's not exactly what they needed, but maybe just that last 10% wasn't. Maybe the first 90% of that was something valuable. And so in that case, I'll say that failure wasn't a bad thing. Think about what we say in education all the time. Students need to learn how to fail. Failure is not a bad thing. And yet I don't know any school that really embraces failure, right? I think, when a kid fails a quiz or a test or a project, we put the grade in there. And that's not something we really celebrate, right? And so wouldn't it be cool if the kids could experiment and explore and fail without that fear of failure? And that's what long open-ended projects do, because you aren't, there are deadlines and there are points at which you have to make progress. I'm not saying that, but the timing isn't nearly as much of an issue, which unfortunately affects many elements in education when it doesn't need to. Okay, so my takeaways: think about what's important in person and bring it online. Okay, create resources that work. Okay, and allow your projects themselves to be learning tools, not just demonstration tools. Okay, so let's now talk about that. What is good evaluation? What is good feedback? And what is grading? And so this is a area where I'm highly opinionated about it. And there's no right or wrong answer here. There's just people's opinions. And if you ask 10 teachers, you'll get 10 different answers. First of all, what do grades even mean? He or she just got an 87 on a project. What does that mean? Right? So we'll talk more about that in a second. And then also it's important to think about, do you want to focus really on the last final submission. One of my friends is really big about, hey, if they turn in a final project that meets all the criteria, boom, solid grade. Okay, and I'm not like that. I do want that, but I also like, or I like more, the daily and the weekly ongoing rigor that they're going to give. I like that more. So that's something you can think about. We'll talk more about where that fits in here. And then rubrics. Rubrics are the way that you help students understand what's expected of them, how to grade them, and they offer some other things as well, which we'll talk about in a second. So let's dive in here. All right, so the kid got a 97 or an 87 on a project. What does that mean? Does it mean that they understood 87% of the content? Does that mean they completed only 80% of the project according to the rubric? Or did they finish 100% but just didn't do some? Or did they skip over a couple? Or was it late? Or, so you don't even, or did they not do it exactly like the teacher asked, or whatever the thing may be, that number doesn't give you enough information to be able to make an accurate reflection. And usually that grade is just put in the grade book, done. All right, so there's no learning that happens with that one. So I'll challenge us, there's ways to do better that translate not just online, anywhere. Okay, so one of the options you've got is multiple rubrics. Okay, so for example, I'll say we'll look at two, and I do realize that this could be a little more work on the teacher's part, but I think the value's there. All right, so let's say that you have, in my case, a computer science project, and I've got whatever 15 skills or something that I want them to demonstrate. Okay, so what I'll have is I'll separate out my computer science checklist of skills and content they have to demonstrate in the project, and then I can evaluate that one way, and then I'll say, okay, but you originally set out to do this project. So back to my app reference, you set out a project you wanted to help a person with dementia or Alzheimer's remember the faces and names of their grandkids. Did you do that in an effective way? Does it make that person's life better because of the app you made? All right, and that's a different grade. It's possible they did really, really well in one of those, but not the other. Okay, because even if the app really does something really, really cool, but they didn't use any of the skills you want them to learn. Okay, I assume there was a reason why you had them want to learn these skills to maybe allow them to push themselves further or whatever. And so I'll challenge you on that one to separate those out. That way you might have a 92 and an 81 or something like that. And so now it's 2 grades. They'll average out to your 87 or whatever. Okay, but now you've at least communicated. You did really well on this piece, but not as well on this, so you know what to work on in the future. Okay, and when you resubmit, you can work on that as well. Wait, what? Did he just say resubmit the project? Yes, I did. All right. But also, before I leave rubrics, I wanted to say this. In the rubric, you can actually have student choice. And that's what I was talking about before in the skills and the content, all that kind of stuff. If you have a list of skills they're supposed to demonstrate, you have 10 skills, whatever, right? But that's an arbitrary list. You just came up with that list based on what you think they should probably be able to do, or maybe you got that from a textbook or your department or whoever, right? It doesn't matter. It's an arbitrary list, and that can be bigger or smaller, and it's still a list. So what if you gave 20 skills and you said, use 10 of these? Right. And yes, you can have subcategories. Well, you've got to use at least 2 or 3 from this category. You can do that kind of stuff if you think there's value. But give them some choice, because especially in individual projects, every project doesn't need every skill, or every project can't bring in, at least in real ways, all the content you need them to do. So give some choice in there so they can do that. And again, they'll respond with that choice. And then also do this. Don't ever let them get an A without doing something above and beyond. We set up our rubrics such that any person who goes through this stuff right here can get up to a 90. If you want to get from a 90 to 100, that last little bit, then here's the criteria for that one. And you'll be surprised on how many kids actually make that attempt. So that's a good way of using rubrics to an advantage to push the kids further than they might push themselves. Right. In part 2, I also have students submit a self-grade of the rubric whenever they submit a project. In fact, sometimes I'll have them submit about a week before to kind of pre-see where they are. That way they know what they're being evaluated on exactly. They know what kind of grade they're submitting. And ideally, whatever grade they submit, if they've been accurate and honest about it, should be pretty close to what you're going to give. And I tell them that. All right. In addition, I also think it's very, very valuable in the online environment, because they're not going to get this as much online, is that peer evaluation piece, right? So have the students demonstrate their presentations to the class, probably some type of Flipgrid environment where they can show you and other students can see it, and have students give feedback, both positive and critical, so they can get information that they would normally get from being in class. They can get that online. and then be able to use that information, because I'm a wholehearted believer in resubmitting a project. So what I mean by that is, so I've got some projects due Thursday night, right? And everyone's due Thursday night, and then by Friday they've got to post a demonstration of that for their peers on Flipgrid or whatever. All right, or just Google Docs or some products, right? And then other students have to go in and they have to watch and evaluate 2 or 3 or 4 other kids and give critical advice. And I tell them, I'm grading you on the quality of your advice. Okay, you just saying good job doesn't help. Right, give them something that either could make their project better, meet more elements on the rubric, whatever it might be. Give that advice, and then the students are allowed to resubmit that project a couple days later, and that's vital, and that's so cool, right? And so what you get is just better projects, and students who appreciate each other because they saw other projects, they got better ideas, and you helped build the community as well. So we talked before about whether or not you wanted to have really, really hardcore work at the end of the class in the final submission, or whether you want to just have it on a regular on a regular basis, that hard work. And well, the answer is both, of course. But one of the ways you've got to evaluate long projects, because, you know, I don't care who you are, if it's a 4-week project, it's hard to keep focused for 4 weeks, right? Even for adults. And so what you have is these, whatever, weekly or every set number of days check-ins. And all that means is, hey, you have to reach some sort of point in the project of accomplishment. You define what that is. It may be that the projects are similar enough, at least in the first couple, where you can all have a minimum set, you know, a skeleton or a wireframe or something like that to a certain point. And then after that, you start to have them kind of taper off into their individual ways. And what I found really works well on that one is you have a progress and accomplishment-based check-in. So I tell the kids, hey, we just finished up check-in number 2, and for check-in number 3, you have to add 3 major elements and 1 modification of something you already did in step 1 or step 2. All right, and that way they make progress continuously. Everyone, what that means to everyone based on their project is different, and that's okay. And it doesn't limit anybody. But it also, and when they do that, I make them either show that to me live if I got a small enough class, or you could have them present this live to the whole class. You just happen to be the one grading it when they're showing it too, so other kids can learn and interact. But if not that, they could just screen record that and submit that to me. Okay, and I can then see them show me their project with the new enhancements or new changes, new additions. But also, let's say they don't have as many, or they don't really have much to show. That's going to come out as well, and it's kind of fun to see them explain that. All right, and also just the fact that they're talking about this stuff is really, really important. And this is the kind of thing where, because it's online, you don't necessarily have the same feel for your individual students. Who's really getting it? Who's struggling? Who's loving it? Who's not loving it? Because they're not gonna act like that in the virtual environment. It just doesn't happen for whatever reason. All right, and so these check-ins give you a chance to see, just based on their language, based on their confidence level, based on their personality of them describing things. It gives you a feel for the student as well, and that's vital in the online environment because you don't get that on a regular basis. All right, deep dive learning. I'm so excited about this, and I want to share this because this is. If you don't get anything from my presentation, get this, do this. All right, so deep dive learning, this isn't a word, this is just something this is my word, okay? So it won't be on the internet. So what I mean by deep dive learning is, so in computer science, for my world, it means a segment of code that you worked really, really hard to figure out, and you're really proud of it, and you get to describe in excruciatingly deep detail what it does, how it works, how you figured it out, and talk to me. I have the students do this either live or recorded video, and they just talk, and it's technical, and it's awesome. When they finish, they feel good. You hearing it, this is like your stuff, right? And I joke with them. I said, if you're doing this and your parents overhear you and they understand you, you haven't gone deep enough. Redo it. All right. And so, because think about it, what better skill to have your kids get good at than whatever discipline you're in, them being able to talk about that discipline at a real business kind of level. All right, I love that, and we do it in all of our projects. I don't care what the technology, what the project is, they're doing deep dives on a regular basis, all right? And anyway, so that's something that's huge that we do in there, and it also gives you a really good chance to interact with the students, and again, they can give student feedback to each other, they can look at each other's, and that is so important in an online environment for that community building, which is not happening naturally, so you've got to provide outlets for that. And I'll finish up with this last thing. What's the final something that they do? When they get to the end of the project, what is it that they're doing? They just give it to you and that's done? All right, well, that's not the best in the world. Sometimes I guess it might happen, but what if you could provide some place for them to present that? Right? In our freshman class in 9th grade, we actually have like a science fair where the students present to all their parents. All right. And so we won't be able to do that this year, but can we do that online, virtually? Well, not exactly like that, but can they do a presentation with they made a board and a demonstration and a presentation that they can give to 5 people online? Yeah, they sure do. We're going to do that. Okay. In the 10th grade, we actually have the students actually teach their parents for their final exam a whole project, right? A miniature project for a couple hours, and they're not allowed to touch a mouse. And their parents have to do it, and they have to walk their parents through the whole thing. Okay. Won't be able to do that in person. Can we do it online? Yep, we sure can. Okay. And they're going to record it. I get to see I get to see that learning. I get to rewatch that. Okay. In one of our classes, we do a Shark Tank for a final exam where we invite members of the community, academia, research, entrepreneurs, business owners, right? Professionals in the industry, and they come in and they grill our students on their projects, and then the students have to vie to get $1,000 from one of the sharks, right? And so we will be able to do that. Well, not in person. Can we do it online? Yep. You're going to have 3 sharks tonight. You're going to have one at 7, one at 7:15, and one at 7:30. Be ready to give your A game because you're going to have to present hard, and you're going to have to be able to understand the marketing and the business behind your project because you're going to get a bunch of people from some different perspectives who are going to grill you about your project. Okay, and you better have a good presentation. Be ready for the Q&A session. Right? That's what I'm talking about. A final something, and that translates directly into online beautifully. So, anyway, I hope that something I've said today works for you, and you can maybe take it back and do something with it. I have loved so much talking about this, and I look forward to the conversations that are going to follow this up. And so a couple takeaways here on the last section. Definitely do those things. And Beth, is back to you.
Thank you so much, Doug. And thanks for sharing your expertise on project-based interactive learning. I know I learned a tip or two that I may just try on my next project. Thank you all to the participants for joining us today. We hope this information was useful for you as you transition to online learning. As I mentioned earlier, we will be hosting webinars through May 1st. We're also hosting office hours to answer any further questions that you might have. You can find information for both the webinar series and office hours on our webpage at awseducate.com. Let's now transition over to answer your questions in chat. Okay, hey Doug, this is Beth, and I think
Hey, Beth, how you doing?
Hey, good. Hey, we've got a couple questions that have popped in, and I was wondering if, I know you've answered a couple of them in the
Sure.
chat, but I
Yep.
was wondering if maybe you could dive deeper into one of the questions about resources,
Sure.
specifically that you use for online education or, anything else that you might have to provide, especially around the rubrics. It seemed like we
Sure.
had quite a few questions around rubrics.
Yes, it's definitely, and then those are the keys to project-based learning. It's not a perfect art form, trust me. I still have rubrics which I improve and I tweak continuously, just based on what the students are spending their time with. I want them to get stuck in the right places, and so I design the projects so they get stuck in the right places. And so for resources, I mentioned in the video, the key on that one is just to have a variety of resources of different types, right? Meaning that some of your students are visual learners, some are deep thinkers, some are quick to get something quickly. And so depending on who they are dictates what kind of resource they're going to need. And you may not have all these immediately. Don't forget also, you can have students help you build these resources. That could be a couple of assignments early on, was to help you build the resources, which are going to then help them do the projects. But what I recommend is, upfront anticipate specifically when you create this project, and it's going to be a 1-week project, 2-week project, 3-week project, whatever kind of project it's going to be. Anticipate in advance what are they going to need and where are they going to get stuck when they're doing this project. All right. And so think about that in advance and go ahead and pre-answer those questions, or have, a link of resources, a link to an external set of resources, a link to a website, a link to something you've created. Maybe you've got a document from a previous semester. Have these kind of like a Q&A session, but have them pre-set up so when the kids do have a question, they've got this to go to. Because if you'll have that and it's easy to see, easy to get to, and they're aware that it's there, when they do get stuck, when you're not in front of them, they very well may be able to stumble through and figure that out. Okay, and then anything that's not going to be answerable, or anything that you're not going to have a resource on your resource page may be the kind of thing that's exactly when I need to meet this student for a couple of minutes, kind of thing. So multimedia, multi-types, multi-sizes, the more the merrier. You can't go wrong with having well done resources. And I replace and update my resources on a regular basis. But I mentioned before, and I'll stop here, don't have too many. Sometimes people are so overwhelmed. You having a list of 77 links is not helpful, right? Pick your best 3, 4, 5, or something like that, or have 3 or 4 things which say this link is really good for these 4 things, this link is good for these 4 things. If you'll do that, it allows your kids to use that resources immediately and effectively.
Yeah, great response, Doug. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yep.
That might tie into the next question a little bit. It looks like we've got a question from India, I think.
Okay.
How to create the interest of students towards online education. I mean, I think the point is, it is hard enough to keep kids engaged in the classroom. And now, what are some tips to keep them engaged online when you're not physically in front of them? That's how I would interpret that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. It's a great key, because not everyone responds to it. Not everyone has the same type of technologies. There's so many factors online that were not factors in your classroom. Because in your classroom, when you close that door, you control what happens to a certain extent. What happens when you're online, there's now 10 other things going on that you do not control, right? And so now there's so much more against us, and it was already hard enough like it was, right? So I think at this point, if I go back to that very first slide where I said that student buy-in is key. So you've got to go, I teach high school, so I'm really good with the high school kid and what they're thinking about. Whatever grade level that you're in and that you teach, you got to think about what is important to these kids right now in their life. All right, what's important is that whatever it was, and then you say, okay, so if that's what's important for them, why don't I'm doing my subject area is math or science or history or art, whatever, and here's the skills I want to teach, but can I do that through something which relates to the things that are important to kids right now? Okay, and so depending on what is important in your culture and in your school and in your community, and students at that age group, what is it that they're thinking about when they're not with you? Right? When they're just on their own with their friends, what are they talking about? What are they thinking about? What if you can figure out what some of those elements are and bring those elements into their learning? Because now they're like, wait, I've got to learn this math. I don't really like math, but I really love music. And now they're doing this thing with math and music together. Suddenly I like the math project. So I think that's the key, is finding out and figuring out what it is they're going to respond to. Just because you think it's cool, well, that may not matter, because you're not a middle school kid or you're not a high school kid, right? So you've got to think, you got to play them on their own playground, right?
Yeah, I love it. That's really great. And I think relevance is exactly what you're nailing the head right there. Yeah.
And it's an art form. It is an art form, and you got to figure it out, and you'll be wrong sometimes. And that's when you punt and you recreate it right there on the spot.
You got it. Fantastic. So there are 2 questions here that sort of relate. So I'll kind of summarize and combine them into 2.
Yep.
And as it relates to relevance and engagement, how do you manage your class size online? And are you doing separate sessions? Like, if you could talk tactically about how you're managing. There's an example here of somebody who has 5 classes of 33 students each. How are you managing that kind of load?
Sure. Well, okay. So your specific technology choices that you make is going to have some impact on that. So, for example, some schools are using, Google Meet or Chime, or we're using Zoom. And for that specific scenario, what that does, especially for like projects where you've got 3 or 4 kids working together, you want them to be able to work together. Or like you said, I've got 37 kids in a class, and that's not going to work good in anything. It forces you to be one directional, and that's passive learning. And that's exactly what we're not trying to do. So what you can do is there are, if Zoom offers the ability to have breakout rooms where I can assign X, 7 kids in this room and 7 kids in this room. And what you might do, just on the top of my head, you might say, okay, I've got all 37 kids right now. Hey, children, we're going to be doing this thing for the next hour or half hour or whatever. Okay, so does everyone understand the directions? Okay, now I'm going to put you into small groups to go do that. All right, so these groups are in breakout session A, these are in breakout session B, breakout session C, and I can jump into each one of those to sort of go in there and guide and kind of wander through, kind of like I would wander from group table to group table to group table, just to spread that out, because having a 7 or 10 or 12 kids in a session is very doable. Okay, versus 37 is not. Other option you might do, and I know it's more work on the teacher, is what if you were to say, you know what, I've got an hour slot, the first half hour I want to have the first 15 kids, and the second half hour I have the second 15 kids. So just literally taking a scenario which wasn't your fault, you were just given these kids, and spread that out a little bit. It might be more work on the teacher, but you might get more engagement from your students. So that's a tough one though. Yeah, and you're limited a little bit by the technology on that one.
Yeah, interesting. I have a middle schooler and a high schooler at home, and that's the approach that their teachers have done, which is split the classes into smaller chunks so they can kind of manage it. Yeah.
You really have to. Well, and one more thing is on that one. So the other thing is that if you're delivering content and it's you giving information to them, that's not good in online learning anyway. So that scenario, if you've got, even if your boss said you have to have all 37 kids at once, you can do that if those 37 kids are all working on their own project during that time, and they're not all listening to you. They're just looking down, working their project, and then they might look up and say, hey, Mrs. Jones, I have a question about X. That's going to be a little more manageable if you have to do that environment, right?
Yeah, and actually that rolls right into at the topic of flipped classrooms, and how this is a great opportunity for educators to do just what you're saying with project-based learning, give them projects to do outside the classroom, come online and meet face to face to do questions and that kind of stuff. So let me ask you another question about how would you approach, obviously, Doug, your background is the CS, is your focus. How would you maybe do project-based learning, or do you have suggestions on how to do PBL for non-CS topics or domains?
Well, it's really the same process. I'm not an expert in math or science or history or whatever, and so but there are, when I look at a project, I think to myself, okay, so I'm and I'm not using a textbook so much, but I just sort of got that same thing in my head. But I think about, most importantly, what are my learning objectives that I'm trying to get across during the next month of my life, all right, or 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever the time period is. What are the learning skills, the learning, what's the content I want to get across? What are the skills I want to get across? Number one, I want to get that as best I can, okay? And I'm not going to be able to just give it to them on a piece of paper and say, memorize this, because that's not good teaching anyway, but especially now you can't do that, okay? And so I've got these 5 events and then these 5 skills that I want to bring together, okay? And then I just go into brainstorm mode and I think about, okay, well, if I look at these words and these words and these words, what things are bubbling to the surface on the types of things where all these come together in one place? And I'll even say this, if you're a beginner in project-based learning, trust me on this, when you tell your kids they're going to do a project instead of them sitting there listening to you, okay, they're going to love that. And if you go to them and be honest with them and say, hey, kids, listen, we're going to do this project-based learning thing. I've got some, I'm allowed to do this, and now's a good time for it. I need some help in preparing this. Here's the learning skills, and here's the here's the concepts, and here's the words we're going to be doing. What kind of projects would you guys love to do? Not that they're going to give you, you're going to get some stupid stuff and some silly stuff and some bad stuff, but through that just brainstorming a live session, you may actually get 1 or 2 or 3 ideas that spark something in your head, and then you as a professional educator can take those, middle school or high school or even elementary school level of ideas and say, oh, wow, okay, all right, me as a grown professional teacher here, I know how to take what you just said, and I have just decided a kind of projects which might actually really work that bring those 2 together. So it would be completely fine to reach out to that same student body. And, if you haven't reached out to communities online in your profession, now is the time, because there are going to be people in that community who have already either made the jump or have made the jump years ago in project-based learning. And you said, hey, listen, I just want to do something. Give me a couple things to get started in, if you're specific to history or science or foreign language, whatever. So.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. It looks like we might have just a few more questions.
Okay, cool.
One of them says, we've got an educator asking about, what do you do when, let's go back to that breakout room example that you had. And what do you do if there's a group in a partner, a sort of a collaborative online group project that's not active? How do you help the student who's now sort of abandoned? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
so much
So
easier face to face. What are some tactics you could do online?
yeah, and what you're talking about there is just group work issues, not necessarily online, but you're always going to have that one
Hmm.
kid who just isn't pulling their weight. It's tough when you've got 3 or 4 students and they're working on one project, which is going to have one grade on it, and then these 3 students who are go-getters is dependent on student, the last student who's not going to do his or her work, and yet they're going to suffer. I think so. You set the rubric up to account for that, so that one student isn't penalized for another student not doing their work. Okay, and
Hmm.
also I have found what works. And if you talk to people who are good at group things, if you have not just at the end, but in the beginning, middle, and end, have a group dynamic sort of evaluation that you give them, and you hand right then. You say, hey, here's 4 areas that I want you to critique your peers on right now as we're going as we speak, and critique their peers right there on the spot. So at least the person's not doing their work will know that his peers are recognizing that and know that, and
Yeah.
it gives them a chance to sometimes just voice that frustration, but it also gives you, the teacher, a chance to realize that up front and in the beginning versus at the end when you've got kids who are freaking out. And
Yeah.
so, and at that point, you can remove a student. There are things you can do if you've identified that it's a true issue, that you can do as a teacher. But that's the nature of group projects. That is certainly not necessarily to all projects. Projects don't have to be group oriented; they can be collaborative. So the other option on that one will be to put people in groups, but working on their own project, but that they are in groups working. That way, if one student isn't pulling his or her weight, it's not affecting the other students. He or she is just not working on their own project.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. I like the tip about the rubric and then sort of the evaluation at
Yeah,
the end.
that
That's
uh, that
fantastic.
that that is one of the best things that people do, and you'd be shockingly surprised how honest kids are with each other.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. All right. I think we've got one more question here that we
Okay,
haven't.
cool.
A couple of these have been answered through some of the conversation we've
Sure,
had. So
sure.
this one is asking about resources and ideas for teaching learners with limited computer and English skills, if you have any tips or resources in particular.
So if you're limited on tech, I mean, projects, I think by default, we just assume they have to be online. And I think there's going to have to be some minimal online because you have to be able to communicate to someone, but not necessarily. If you can just get the information, I think everything that I said translates to any language, any discipline, any age, as long as you keep that in mind, right? And
Hmm.
so whereas my school is pretty supportive of technology and has always backed it, so I can let there be some tech heavy things. But if my school isn't that, or my community isn't that, I can still have projects which just aren't tech based, right?
Hmm.
Or if maybe the students do have some technology to use, but they, the online, like one of the people mentioned, they're not allowed to connect with their students outside of class, and so there's some
Right.
limitations on that part. Well, as long as you can get information to them, I don't care if it's mailing it, right? So as long as they can get the project, you can still have it. It may go slower, but you can still have the same steps. You can still have your formal proposals for the project, your work time on the project, evidence of accomplishment. Maybe they take a picture and send it to you. Maybe they
Yep.
call you. Some schools that have online, that have telephone systems. I've done projects where I had my students call my phone number and leave a message with the assignment that they're supposed to do. When I did deep dives, sometimes I'll have them do that, and that way it's not technology that I had to do. Everyone had a phone. It didn't require video resources. I was able to get some feedback in my phone system that the school was already supporting, and it was within the rules, right? And so that
Hmm.
could be an option for some people that have that. As far as the language, I don't know specifically what that question was referring to, whether the teacher spoke the same language. I wasn't sure what element of that one, but in the same thing again, if you've got, especially if technology isn't a problem and you can explain if you have English, you have students who are doing English as a second language,
Hmm.
maybe some of the resources that you create are in dual language, and your students would probably love to help you do that. So you could explain both the project expectations, the proposal expectations in written form, in video form, in written form, in 2 or 3 other different languages, because it may be that someone who's a visual learner can see the writing of the assignment and understand perfectly, but if they see my video, they may not understand that because I talk too fast, right? And so, and I would say, my guess is the parents and the students of the kids in your school would probably be more than happy to help you create those resources and translation documents that might help you in that scenario. I'm not sure exactly if that's what that student was asking, if that person was asking, but I think that's at least something that came to mind on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it sounds like that seems like the answer for that question. So I'm gonna pause just a sec and see if there's any more questions. I think we've answered most of them through our discussion. If anybody has any more, any last comments?
I'll just say this, yeah, certainly. So on the at some point, everyone will be able to go and watch the archive of this. And on that first screen, I posted my contact information. I'm happy to connect with anyone who has any specific questions, or some people ask for some examples. I'm happy to send you some examples of some rubrics I've got, some things that I've gotten and working. I'm happy to do that with anyone who is willing to spend the time to reach out to me.
That's awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Doug. So I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much to all the participants from around the globe that have participated. Thank you so much, Doug, especially for your time and your effort to share your expertise. And thank you.
So fun. I appreciate the opportunity.
Great, thanks. And we'll be in touch. And I hope you guys reach out and take a look at the rest of the recordings that we have and the remainder webinars. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.